It's very early for me. I live in the West Coast, so I'm gonna do my best and hope my ADHD meds kick in. We're doing great. We're doing great. So yeah, we'll be talking about building accessibility community and systems for the long haul. So this is not so much a talk about accessibility as a talk about doing accessibility work, if that makes sense. Did it click? It worked. Okay. So a little bit about me. Oh, I shouldn't do that because my microphone's right there. I'm an independent digital accessibility consultant. I've been working in this space since 2012, which is bananas to me. Identify as disabled, chronically ill, and neurodivergent. And I'm currently based in Duwamish territory, AKA Seattle, Washington. I have a picture of me, middle-aged lady, black glasses, blue hair. In the picture, I'm holding a little gummy candy pizza. I needed a more recent picture, so that's what we get. So the things I want to talk to you about today are going to be why community matters, why community in the accessibility space matters, why systems matter, and then we're going to talk a little bit about accessibility operations, which is my favorite topic, and also spoilers, is a combination of community and systems. So first, let's talk about community stuff. So who here actually has the word accessibility in their title? I guess is a question. Very, very few. Okay. Who does accessibility work but doesn't have accessibility in their title? That would be everyone. Okay. And how many of you do this type of work alone? A couple brave souls. How many of you have a team that you work with? Okay, quite a few. How many of you feel like you are pulling people with you kicking and screaming? Okay, not as many as I thought. Okay, that's good. That's good. I ask these questions because it's helpful just for me to know like where people are in this work. So depending on where you work, sometimes you might be kind of the solo person, sometimes you might be working with a team, but you're the kind of the resident accessibility person, and you're expected to be able to know how to do all the things related to accessibility, even if you don't, which is very reasonable. But often we end up in situations where we're kind of by ourselves. We're kind of, at least it feels like we're responsible for accessibility and other people aren't. And that can feel very lonely. So one of the things I just want to put out there is that none of us can do this work alone. A lot of the focus I put on community is around not necessarily formal community, if you don't have a team, for example, but we're going to talk about some ways to not feel so alone in that vein. I really pressed the wrong button. Okay, so when I talk about accessibility community, what does that mean? There's a couple of things I mean by that. One is the concept of affinity. So affinity is a fancy word for community, shared goals, things like that. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. So affinity is the thing that brings us together. It brings people that have common interest, common cause together. The thing that keeps us together and that also connects us to other people who maybe aren't as into this as we are is trust. And then the third thing is this concept of climate, organizational climate. So you hear a lot about organizational culture. You hear a lot about kind of, we live in a society culture, but there's also cultural climate, which we'll talk about more as well. So affinity, I keep pressing the wrong button. I don't know what button I'm pushing, but it's the wrong one. There should be the word affinity in there as well. That's okay. So affinity is the concept of shared values, shared commitments, shared passions. So, you know, things that you are interested in that other people are interested in as well. Other words that you can use for affinity are, you might hear solidarity is a word you often hear maybe multiple groups coming together. And then coalition is another word you hear in this space. And yes, I'm going to say the evil DEI words that we're not supposed to say anymore. A lot of this is about that, so just be prepared. So a lot of this comes down to things like having a shared strategy, a shared sense of justice, maybe shared calls to action, sort of shared ways of learning, and sharing of ideas, and also a sense of protection, a sense of sort of safety in numbers. So yes, those are sort of aspects of affinity that you might see. Another way to think about it is that affinity is like a Venn diagram. You're in presenter mode. That's okay. You can see my notes. It's fine. One way to think about affinity is as a Venn diagram. So if there's different areas that are overlapping, affinity is the place where all of those things overlap each other. So because I was hungry when I did this slide deck, I was thinking about breakfast. Breakfast could be affinity between things like oatmeal and eggs and coffee. You don't have to eat those things at breakfast. You can eat them whenever you want. But a shared thing they have in common is oatmeal. Is breakfast. So accessibility community is very similar in that it's a mix of people, different backgrounds, different needs. So there's usually technologists, there's disabled people and chronically ill people, there's neurodivergent people, there's non-disabled allies, and then there's disability justice advocates, or kind of the policy people. So we all have this affinity point, which is the accessibility community. So that's that piece. Next piece I want to talk about is trust. So one of the reasons why trust is hard and why it's so important in our space is that we're asking a lot of people. And I don't mean that in a like, ultimately what we're asking for is for humans to be treated like humans, but when we come into organizations or we work inside organizations and accessibility is not the norm, we're asking people to do a lot, to rethink a lot for themselves, both at the individual level and at the organizational level. So we're asking them to change things like processes and tools. We're also potentially asking them to rethink their values if accessibility has not been kind of in their value set. And we're also asking them to honestly give a shit about disabled people. So prioritizing preventing or avoiding harm is really important. And depending on who you're talking to or the way your organization, does this stuff, that might be very, very challenging. There's a book that I highly recommend called DEI Deconstructed by Lily Zhang. They also have a ton of videos on YouTube. There's lots of different ways to get at their work, even if you're not a book person. I had oatmeal this morning. Thank you for that question. I thought about eggs, but I had oatmeal. We're good? Okay. So Lily Zhang has a quote in this book that trust is the currency of change, which I think is super important because a lot of what we're trying to do really is change management. We're trying to help people through this process. And that's not a thing that a lot of us are necessarily trained in. So I think it's an important concept to think about. There are also levels of trust. Oop, nope, nope, there we go. So this is a thing from that book I just mentioned, talking about levels of trust. And we have to do different things depending on what level we're at. So for example, if you're starting from absolutely zero with your accessibility program, you have to build a lot of coalition. You have to start finding those people who are going to be your partners, as well as doing program management to kind of get things off the ground. If you're at medium trust, some people trust you, then you're still doing some building, but you're starting to be able to focus more and more on just doing the accessibility work. And if your trust is high, that means accessibility is kind of normalized. People are bought in. They're like, oh yeah, I know how we're talking about that. Yeah, I am doing these things, X, Y, or Z. So this can be a really helpful way to think about kind of what to be focusing on if you're trying to start to build that community, depending on where your level of trust is with the organization. So this is a concept from organizational theory, organizational psychology. I used to be a librarian, so this is one of my also pet topics. So when we talk about cultural climate, we're usually talking about something that's set from top down. So there's a tone that's set by leadership that says, these are the things that we value. This is what we are going to focus on. These are our goals. These are our policies. Climate, on the other hand, is from the bottom up of the organization. It's set by the majority of workers. These are things like unofficial missions, values, and goals, unofficial policy process and procedure. So these are the things where it's like, well, technically the handbook says to do X, but we actually don't do that. We do this other thing instead, because it's much more efficient for us, or it's easier, or has a better outcome, whatever those things are. So that's the difference between climate and culture. Yes. And so another way to think about this, like I mentioned, if we have I'm not saying offices are pyramid schemes. If you have a pyramid, there's culture at the top. Culture is the little tiny thing at the top that is put together by the fewest people, the people that are in leadership. And then below them is the majority of people. So the lower down you are on the pyramid, more impacted you are by culture, or sorry, by climate, less by culture. And there's also the difference between sort of having authority if you're at the top of the pyramid, or if you can take part in grassroots activities as you're closer to the bottom. So that's the difference between those two things that I like to talk about. So if you forget anything else from this talk, think about shifting the climate instead of the culture, because a lot of us do not have the power or authority to shift things in the culture. Okay, so why do systems matter? This breaks down to kind of a few pieces. So also when I talk about systems, I don't just mean like automated testing tools. I also mean things like how you communicate with people on a regular basis, or the processes that you create with people. So there's kind of three main things I think about with this, which are processes, which is how we're supposed to do things, practices, which are how we actually do things, and then the patterns that we can observe by looking at those things. And I'm gonna skip that one. So accessibility programs usually have, again, I've got another Venn diagram. They're usually a combination of things like testing, training, communication, governance, politics, and tools. These are all kind of the things that we're usually all juggling. So I mentioned that processes tie into this idea of the things you're supposed to do. These are the things that are usually written down. These are the things that you put in place, trying to help teams like do a thing better. But then there's actually how people actually go about those things. And these are really important because just because the practices are different than your processes doesn't mean that people like aren't listening to you. Maybe they've just found a better way to do the thing that you're asking them to do. So figuring out what people are actually doing can be a really important part of improving the practices, kind of paving the cow paths, as it were. They also show us patterns in behavior. So if you observe a system for long enough and you start to think about like, okay, I'm telling people to do this, they're doing this other thing instead. Why is that? Maybe someone else is telling them to do something different. Maybe someone else has power in this situation that you're not aware of. Maybe they don't trust you and they trust someone else. Maybe they don't have resources to do the thing that you're telling them to do. What types of things have been successful with them? Those are types of things you can look at to think about, like, okay, the thing I'm asking people to do isn't working. What are some other things I can try instead? So systems are really what we want them to be, is things that are helping us. We don't want to be helping the system. We want the system to be helping us. So ideally, the systems that we're creating help us manage our energy, time, and effort. And the way these two things are connected is I've got a little circular diagram connecting the word community and the word system. And community is the thing that shows us how people actually work. They show us our practices. And then out of that, we can ideally create systems. And the better our systems get, the more we can focus on the community, the more we can focus on people again. So it's supposed to be kind of this feedback loop, ideally, that we can learn from, and we can get more insight into what is actually going to work. So why does all of this matter? Well, there's this concept of accessibility operations, where, spoilers, we're trying to do more with less, because we have less and less to work with usually. And because we're trying to do all of these different things and juggle all of these different scenarios and help all these people do their work and keep them happy. So the definition I like of accessibility operations is it's a philosophy, it's a way of thinking about it, and it's a practice of connecting people, technology, and processes to create, maintain, and improve accessibility for products and services. So the goal isn't just to do less work. The goal is to do less work that is helping more people more efficiently. And the two foundations of this, I think, are affinity, which I mentioned before, talked a little bit about, and this concept of enablement, where instead of you doing other people's accessibility work for them, you are making it easier for them to do the work that you want them to do, which is a tall order, but it is possible. So enablement is going to do things like reducing friction, changing that climate we talked about, and helping people help themselves so that you aren't a bottleneck, and you don't feel like you have to answer every DM asking you the same accessibility 101 questions over and over and over again that we all get. And one of the things we can do to help this happen is by using affinity, because affinity creates kind of snowball effect, where yes, it starts with you and you are only one person, but then as you start to build out your community, you have more people who are trying to do this work and who are interested in this work. They can identify common causes that they have, and then they can start to collaborate on problems that they're trying to solve. And they're able to do this without you being the person facilitating all of that directly, if you can kind of make them feel comfortable enough to do the work and to work with each other. So this comes to another organization theory idea, which is a community of practice. And there's three parts to this. There's people, purpose, and practice. I'm not going to bore you with all of the details, but the idea is that those three things have to be there for this to work. So the people stuff is things like relationships, social complexity, and maintaining that community. So the actual work of community maintenance. The purpose comes back to affinity. Why are you doing this? Why do you care? Who's there? What type of mutual accountability can you create so that people are helping each other and holding each other accountable? How are you interpreting rules, which can be everything from like, how do we interpret WCAG for our particular situation to, hey, this new super restrictive policy came down. How can we interpret that, quote unquote, so that we can continue to do what we're trying to do while, saying like, yeah, we're checking the boxes, it's fine. That's all stuff around interpretation. And the last part is practice. And that comes down to stories. So what are the stories we tell each other about what we're doing, what we care about, the tools we use, maybe events we have, artifacts we create, documents, recordings, things like that, and then the actions we take as a group. And if you're like, this sounds kind of familiar, because you probably already have a community of practice and maybe you just weren't thinking about it in that way. Very common examples of communities of practice that organizations have are resource groups. So these are typically assembled to help people that work at or attend or use an organization. So they might be disability ERGs for employees or groups for disabled students. And then you also often have champion networks, which is what a lot of us have done kind of out of desperation to try to build community at our organizations when we don't have authority to really do so. And the idea there is that you are teaching each other and you're kind of trying to scale learning across the organization, even if you can't sit with every team and teach all of them individually. So you probably have one of these already, even if you weren't thinking about it in this way. And if you don't have one, then you should think about creating one. So communities of practice are this connection point, and this is a long quote, but I'm going to read it because I think it's important. There's a book called Communities of Practice. It's exactly what it sounds like. And a quote from that book is that communities of practice are the locus of real work. Their practices are where the formal rests on the informal. So coming back to that, like the things we're supposed to do versus the things we're actually doing day to day. Where the visible counts on the invisible, where the official meets the everyday. Designing practices and policies is important, but at the end, the practice is practice that produces results, not the processes and policies. So again, coming back to this idea of like, it doesn't matter what the stuff that's written down is, if that's not, like ultimately that doesn't matter. What matters is that what are people actually doing day to day. So for example, an accessibility community practice typically will attract people that are already in the weeds of doing accessibility work. Maybe they're kind of the official or unofficial accessibility person on their team or in their department. They might be, technical, or they might be governance oriented. These people are usually self-selected. They're usually like, well, I'll do it because no one else will do it. And people are typically looking for kind of like real solutions to problems that they're having. They're looking to collaborate. Maybe they're looking for sponsorship. They're looking for allies. And they're looking for some sort of mutual support and accountability. Like, who can help me actually do this because I'm getting frustrated and burnt out by trying to do it by myself. So communities of practice can enable a couple things for you. Sneaky things. So you get a little view into how people are actually doing their work by kind of, they're not your spies, but they're kind of your spies. You can sort of like tap into like, oh, how does your team do this? Or what is your team leadership thinking about? It's also an audience you could kind of like try your new stuff on if you're trying to maybe create a new document or get people to use a new process. You can maybe pilot that with some folks from this group. You can collaborate and do experiments. And it's another way that you can sort of see those high-level patterns where you can see like, oh, okay, actually this team and this team are trying to solve the exact same problem, but they don't know that because they don't talk to each other. But I have observed that. So that's potentially a way to connect people to not have everyone trying to reinvent the wheel all the time. And it can be an incubator for solutions. You might have people that are like, hey, this is a thing we're actually trying to fix or solve. And you have a better sense of what teams actually need to be able to help them to solve those problems. So obviously this is a big topic and I could talk about this forever. The one things I want to focus on for the last few minutes are training, communication, and governance of those sort of program level things. How people do testing is however you want to do testing. What tools you're using are whatever tools you have, and the politics of your particular situation are always going to be unique. But training, communication, and governance, I think, are things we can sort of talk about more generally. Make it easy to find you. And I don't mean people sending you DMs at 8 p.m. asking you to test things for them. What I mean by that is the things that you create, the things that you want people to use need to be easy for them to find. So when you're making things like slide decks, recordings of sessions, writing documentation, creating training materials, accessibility status reports, whatever it is that you're producing that you want people to use, needs to be actually easy for people to find. You don't want to be the only way that people know where those things are and how to find them. And that also counts for things like office hours, community meetings. You want to make it clear, like, these are times I'm available, so that people aren't trying to get at you all the other times when you've told them that you're not available, because they will, just forever. And also, I hate that I have to put this on the slide, but please make all of these things accessible. I know that that is a thing. Sometimes the tools we're using are not ideal. Sometimes the things we need to start with are like, well, actually, I can't teach people how to do accessible stuff because the LMS we're using isn't accessible. Those are all problems that we need to figure out. But whatever things you're making, whatever the format is, please make them accessible as you can, because you don't know who's going to find them and who might need them. Some other tricks are to figure out where people are already going for information. So this is going to come back to get a sense of like, what are teams actually, where are they actually going for information? That's not just directly to you, hopefully. So depending on your organization, you'll have different things, but you might have learning designers or knowledge managers of some sort. They might be librarians. They might be some sort of other knowledge managers. Project coordinators, people that know what things are actually happening and what things people are actually doing and where they're actually going to do those things. And then you can do things like contribute to role-specific handbooks, maybe testers at a particular organization. There's a handbook that they use. Maybe they're doing testing in general. They're not just doing accessibility testing, but instead of having like an accessibility hub for people to go to outside of their regular places that they go for stuff, maybe the information just lives there instead. That can be things like process documentation. That can be things like newsletters, annual training cycles, like when people have to do security training and things like that. And then also just-in-time learning, which is one of my favorites, which is basically like if someone has to go and solve a problem, they shouldn't have to know all of the ins and outs of how to solve it. But if they're, say, trying to build an autocomplete widget, they shouldn't have to do that without any sort of context. Like ideally, there might be a design system or something that they can go to where that information that they need to do that thing correctly is there as they're trying to build that thing or make that decision. Another really important part of this is actually being anti-ableist in our work. And when I say anti-ableist, what I mean is ableism is a system of oppression, and it is also intersects with other systems of oppression. And it's really easy when we're doing our work, whether we have disabilities or not, to go with the flow with whatever the overarching organizational culture is around disability. But that actually has really big impacts on our work. Things that are anti-ableist in work are things like collaboration, accommodation, so making sure that everyone who wants to be involved can participate, flexibility, intersectionality, anti-perfectionism, which I think a lot of us are. Who's a recovering perfectionist or yep, I see, okay, yep. And the concept of working joyfully and not compulsively. A lot of us work compulsively. This work is very important to us and it is also exhausting. So we need to be nice to ourselves and also be creative and flexible about how we do this work so that we can involve everyone who actually wants to be involved. Another piece of this is enabling community to learn on their own, which can be really scary because you're like, what if they're learning the wrong thing? They might be. You don't always necessarily have complete control over that. but giving people the opportunity to kind of learn at their own pace and the way that they prefer to learn is important. Another thing that's really important is helping them learn from each other. So if you can connect people, you can facilitate those connections and they can work together. It's not you assigning them homework, it's them being like, oh yeah, I'm trying to solve that problem too. They're gonna come up with better ideas together, even if you're not sitting there watching them like a hawk, trying to prevent them from making mistakes. That's gonna be a more impactful experience on them. And another thing we have to do is actually really reward people for doing a good job. This means rewarding them for being creative, being critical thinkers, sharing and collaborating, not for complying, because no one likes compliance. Not for complying. That's the bar is below the ground. But actually thinking about this creatively and doing interesting work and doing things that are interesting for them to do and sharing those things with each other. I mentioned before I'm a librarian, and so when I talk about critical thinking, I want to just remind people about information literacy, which is really important in literally everything we do. So some questions that you can help people learn to ask around this work is when and where is this information from? Who made it? Why was it made? Who benefited from it when it was made? And who benefits from it now? To get a sense of like, is this a useful resource for me as a person who's trying to learn on my own? These are some things that it's helpful to remind people to think about these things when they're considering any sort of learning materials, any sort of information. In accessibility specifically, we can ask questions like, we can help people try to answer questions like, what guidelines and practices apply to me? I'm a designer. What do I need to know about accessibility? Like what CAG success criteria apply to me? That kind of thing. Who can I trust in this space and why? And I don't necessarily just mean like, who are the authorities that are, quote unquote experts who are in the field, but what type of different perspectives do people have? This person is an expert because they have lived experience versus this person is an expert because they build a piece of software. Those are very different types of expertise. What sorts of tools and resources are available for me in my particular role? Where and how can I learn more when I need to? So do I not have to go bother a person to find out? Is there a place where I can just go learn more? And am I reducing harm to people with disabilities? Am I actually doing things that actually have an impact? And one of the things that's really hard about this is that this is more mentorship and management because you don't have control over what other people do, which sometimes really sucks. You really want people to do the right thing. You want them to make the right choices, but that's ultimately not your decision. So you can kind of guide them and help them figure out those things, but you can't ultimately make people do, well, anything really. So one of the ways you can do this is by decreasing friction. And this is also ways to reduce the amount of work that you're doing, hopefully. So using one-to-many communication. So using whatever chat program you use at your organization, having an accessibility channel that you can write things in and talk to a whole bunch of people at once. Maybe there's a department newsletter you can contribute to. Whatever ways that you're gonna get the most people to read your message or experience your message is important. Learning it in context is important. Most of us probably work with adults. Adult brains learn best when we're provided with the context of what we're supposed to be learning. So that's really important. And we're also trying to make small changes over time, not big changes all of a sudden, which is why compliance is tricky. So we want a lot of people to know a little bit instead of a few people knowing a lot. We want people to think critically, and we want them to have realistic goals when it comes to doing accessibility work. We want to prioritize what will reduce harm the most. So if you're struggling too with trying to figure out what should we tackle first, what is going to help the most people the soonest? And then you can start to figure out, even aside from WCAG success criteria or what version of WCAG that you're trying to meet, you can really start to think about like, well, what is going to help the most people based on the content that we create or the resources that we create. And the other thing is, don't wait for leadership to make decisions. A lot of us are probably already working in spite of or ahead of leaders, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So don't ask permission. Try things out, and if you need to apologize later, you can apologize later. But yeah, don't wait for people in power to make decisions. Just start doing what you can. And a lot of this work takes a lot of rest. I was in a serious burnout for a while, and it was not fun. And so don't do that. If you're already burned out, please don't burn out. Take a rest and then get back to work, because this is a forever problem, not a we're done next week problem. And so it's really important that we pace ourselves and we're not trying to do too much at once. A couple of the resources I mentioned that I want to mention again: Communities of Practice by Eddie and Wenger and DEI Deconstructed by Lily Zhang are both great books. And like I said, if you're not a book person, if you just put these people's names into whatever you'd like to search in, you're going to find material about them. Another book I really highly recommend is A Civil Technologist's Practice Guide by Sid Harrell, which is Sid Harrell was, I think, one of the founding members of 18F. Rest in peace, 18F. But that book is about being scrappy and trying to do technology work in places that haven't been traditionally technology places. And then if you're a systems nerd like me, you will enjoy Thinking in Systems if you have not already read it, by Daniela Meadows. That is a classic. And I wrote a book too. It's capitalism. I have to show this to you. I wrote a book called The Accessibility Operations Guidebook, because this is my jam. It is available as an ebook and in paperback right now. And you can go to my website, dpersing.com, to learn more about it, or just come ask me. I have like a handful of copies in my bag. And you can find me on LinkedIn and Blue Sky. I try to answer messages. It's hard, but you can find me at Devon Persing there. So thank you. I realize that this was a lot for the first talk. So sorry, not sorry. Do we, I guess,
All
we
right.
typically have time for questions?
Yes, we do have time for questions. Let me take that away from right up on my mouth. So if you guys in our in-person audience have any questions, if you'll raise your hand, I'll bring you a microphone. And then for our virtual attendees, maybe not stand by the camera. For our virtual attendees, if you'll drop that in the Q&A.
Hello, I'm Kashawn Hopkins from the University of Oklahoma.
Hello.
Thank you for your talk. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I just wanted to ask you a question about building trust. I think that particular point really resonated with me. I think it's something that our particular group struggles with sometimes, and it's hard. It's really hard.
It is.
So I was wondering if you had, I don't know, any tips or like a story or something of like being able to build trust in a space that like you want to be there for them, you have resources for them, you know you can help, you just need to get there for them.
Yeah. I think one of the hardest things to do, and I think one of the most important things to do, is even if you think you know what they need, ask what they need first. I didn't have time in this talk to talk about mutual aid. That's another model I think is really important in this work. But I think thinking about, well, I'm pretty sure that what they need is X, Y, or Z, but I don't actually know that for sure. But actually asking people, and what they say they might need or want might not be what they actually need or want, because they might not know what to say. They might not have the vocabulary to ask for the correct thing, but you can start to kind of whittle away at like, okay, they've said they need help with testing, for example, but I'm worried about this other thing. So the next thing I think to do is to just like watch them work if you can. If you're able to physically sit with them, that's awesome. If you're able to shadow their meetings or things that they're doing to get a sense of like, what are they actually doing? And it needs to be in a, I'm here to learn about you, not a I'm surveilling you sort of way. But I think actually like asking them and then also observing them doing their work or whatever it is that they're doing is a starting point. Because then they'll probably be clammed up when you first start showing up, but then over time they're gonna get used to you being there. And it does take time. That's the other thing. Like that's not something that you can rush. So being patient, which sucks, but yeah, being patient is really important.
All righty. Do we have any more questions? Adam, do you have anything in the chat or the Q&A? Oh, up here.
Yes, you spoke a little bit about going to get information and putting your information where people are going.
Yeah.
How do you recommend identifying those locations? Because
That's-
that is, I've
Yes.
seen lots of places created in my industry and I didn't even know they were there for 2 and 3 years.
How did you, okay, so you're learning about them. Have you asked people where'd they go? Or again, a lot of this just comes back to talking to people, which I know is a nightmare. But it might be talking to your colleagues. It might be, it depends who you're trying to support. But if you can, if you have, I think a good place to start is internal resources. So if you're trying to support people internally in your own organization, figuring out what people are doing internally, and then because finding things externally, that's harder. But I would say if you have any sort of internal wikis, intranets, like any of those types of things, where are they? What are they actually using? And the answer might be nothing, in which case you might have to start from scratch. They might not actually be using any of those resources, but they're probably going somewhere to look up something to do their job. So I think asking people about that and then figuring out like, okay, well, if you're not actually using that, like what would be helpful for you to use? And then that's when it's really good to become friends with people that do knowledge management, if you have those people that do learning, if you have those people, because they will have a better sense of like, what are people actually doing? They'll also know what they're supposed to be doing and then what they're actually doing, because they probably have stats on like, oh, no one actually looked at this wiki in 3 months. That's bad. They'll have a sense of that, hopefully.